Welcome back, GRD 132, to exercise 12, our web type intro. We're working in Replit and we have a little layout in Figma that we were kind of basing it on. And we're doing some coding here. And again, if you're thinking, well, we're doing all this coding, I'm typing code, what does that have to do with typography? Well, we're trying to make it look nice. We're trying to make nice, readable web typography. And with the code that we use, it's just another way to format and actually adjust the line length, which is sometimes called the measure, our line spacing, our contrast, all that kind of stuff we're going to do in here and just make something that looks somewhat nice like that, just to start before we move on to anything else. Now, a couple things in Replit I just want to be aware of, that for whatever reason, if this thing got closed, you're like, oh, I closed it up. You can open it up again. It's right over here, and you could use this thing to open it up. Now, it says hello world right now, but that's okay. You can open it up, and there it is. And close it, and if you run here, that'll show you what's in here. Now, I don't like to work in here. I think it's too small. But anyway, you can move it over here. Let's say you accidentally did that and you don't have anything here. Remember, you can go to these dots here and say add pane and put insert right so it's on the right, and then just use web view. Then when you're in web view, you get that little button that'll open it in a new tab. And there it is. It's open a new tab. And then you don't really need this. I like to just slide it over here kind of out of the way. If you want it peeking out of there a little bit, but then you don't have to hit this run thing or anything like that. And you could even hide this if you want, but I don't need to be going all across the page right now. That's okay, just seeing this. And we basically put our content in index. And if we close this up, also, you might be like, well, where's styles? Just click on here. You can just go back and forth. You don't even have to have them both open at the same time. I think they will be open, but you could just go back and forth like this. Or if they're open here, then you could just go from index to styles, back and forth. And every time you go here and refresh, it'll update the index page. That's what it's updating. And by the way, it does autosave. And so you don't have to save it. So you could always just go to your repels. You know, if you closed it or whatever and you went to open it up, you could go here. I'll go to, let's see, this thing, my repels. I'm like, oh, I closed it up. I could go down here and there it is. Web type Arhoma, I'll open it up, and there's my repel again. So it's just like Figma, sort of. Keep in mind, if there's a lot of use on it, it can get a little slow. Sometimes you'll get connecting on certain times of the day, but it should be okay. I think mine's working okay right now. All right, so what we want to do is make it look more like this. So we want to shorten the line length. We want to spread it out a little. We want to get some margin in here. We could kind of work from backwards in or from behind it in. So we made this blue. That's all we have to do with our body. We'll make that blue. Now, remember, we made this div thing. It's a like div container right here. We're going to make that kind of beigey color, and we're going to make it a certain width, and then we're even going to not adjust the height. We don't want to adjust the height because we want to leave it open so that if text can wrap, it'll keep going down. We don't want it going this way. So we'll kind of make it, just like in Figma, there's auto height. It'll be auto going down this way, but it won't spread out. We want to keep it at a fixed width so it's nice and thin, has a nice short line length. So that's what we'll do. To do that, we'll go over here, go in our styles, and we'll make a selector for div. Now we only have one div. Normally you would give them a name, but right now I'll just call it div. Sometimes we call them container, give it a class name called container, but right now I'll just call it div. If you had more than one div, you wouldn't want to do that. But for now, we only have one div, it's okay. And I'll give a background color. I mean, a couple things we could do here. What are we going to do? We're going to give it a background color, we're going to give it a width, and we could give it a padding. So that'll be good. That's 3 things. So whatever you do first, it doesn't matter, but I guess I should do width first. Well, maybe I should do background color so I could see it. Background. If you start typing background, you should see background dash color. And then I'll just put in beige to start. So I just spell beige. And that looks okay. And then I'll maybe move it a little orangey and maybe just do something like that myself. I'll just do that. And then when I go in here and I refresh it, it's just doing that section. Now that looks a little, it looks like it could be lighter. So that's fine. You could go here, click on this and make it a little bit lighter. And hit enter. That's fine. You could even go here and copy this. Click on this rectangle, copy this if you want, copy that hex color, copy, Command C, Control C, go in here, paste it, and paste it in front of the hex sign or the hashtag, and I'll hit enter. Now that looks a little more like that. I know it's hard to see going back and forth, but that's right. So what do we want to do? We want to shorten it. So let's give it a width. And actually right here, let me backspace because it looks like I lost my semicolon. You should always have a colon, property, and then colon, and then whatever the value is, and then a semicolon to end it, or else it'll have problems getting to the next one. A lot of people forget these and delete them. They're important because they affect the next one. Sometimes this will be okay, but the next one won't. So make sure you have colon, semicolon. You got it? I'll hit enter. I'll make width. Remember what the width was? 400. Now, also one other thing I want to point out, you don't have to put a space after the colon. You could put it right here if you want. That's fine. Width, 400 pixels. That's fine. Can have a space there, but you don't have to. Now, you can't have a space here. You can't put 400 pixels. You do have to have pixels together. You have to have the unit together with the value. But space here doesn't matter, however you do it. And I'm trying to be consistent, so I'll put a space there. And that's 400. Let's see what it looks like. There, that shortened it. Now let's put a padding on it. Now remember, padding is on the inside, so that'll keep the color. So that's why we want padding on the inside, not outside of it. Margin actually is kind of like it pushes stuff away. It's not like the margin on a page, because you think of margin on a page, it's inside the page. But here, padding is inside, margin's outside. So it'll push things away on the outside. So we're going to use padding. So we use padding, colon, and this will put on all sides. You can pick certain sides, but we're going to put it on all sides. I'll put 24, px, and semicolon. How does that look? Good. Now we want this thing kind of centered on our page because right now it's not centered. So we want to center this on the page. Now we can't just say align center. They don't have that, so we're going to have to do something a little bit different. And we're going to center this div by going margin. And you might be saying, well, I thought you said margin is on the outside. We're going to just put some margin on either side of it. So that'll create margin on either side. Now I'm going to put margin, and I'll put a colon, not a semicolon. So hold shift when you do the semicolon, and I'm going to choose auto. Now that puts auto margin all around. Let's refresh this. Now it doesn't put it on the top and bottom, but it puts auto margin on the right and left. So no matter how you resize this, you can see it's staying in the middle. So that kind of is like a sort of like a cheat for centering. It puts auto margin on either side. So margin auto, this centers it. And if you want more space on the top, there's no margin auto top and bottom. You can just actually put a margin top on it. So I can go here and put margin top, and I'm putting it after auto. So you could put a percent, you could put, maybe I'll just put like 100 pixels. Make it a lot for now, because we don't have a lot of text. So that's kind of the way it is over here. So it's starting to look like that a little bit. We now want to put some space in there. We want to put space before all these paragraphs. So let's try that. Let's try doing our P's. So I'm going to go down here and I'm going to select our P's. Now this selects every P, every paragraph. I'll put an opening and closing curly brace, and I'll put, you can use padding or margin. You can, because they don't have space before and space after. What they have, they call it padding. So you could do padding above, and even do padding above here to all the paragraphs. So I'll go over here and I'll do padding top. And remember what we had? We had 12. They had 12 in there. So we'll use 12. See how that looks? Try to get it as close as we can. 12 pixels. And check it out. Oh man, looking nice. And then we're going to do our headline. Now the headline had a little spacing in it. Had a little space after, or we could do space before the subheadline when we do that. But remember, I'm selecting the P here. I'm selecting the div. Now I want to select the H2 and the H1, and I'll do those separately, because remember the H2 is this color, the H1 is that color, it's black, and we may put everything in a sans serif font first, but then we're going to go back in part 3 and use Google fonts. So let's just do this first with real basic fonts. So we have padding top for our paragraphs, and our line spacing I think is okay. I'm not sure, but we want to use a font. We're going to use a sans serif font. So I'm going to use something called font family. And then I'm just going to use Calibri. I'm going to choose Calibri, and then a comma, and then I'll put Arial, and then a comma, and then I'll put sans dash serif. That is treated as one word, sans dash serif. And that means I'll use Calibri first. If they don't have Calibri, they'll use Arial. If they don't have Arial, they'll use whatever sans serif is on your system. So this is using fonts that are on the user system. It's not special font. So we're just assuming everybody has Calibri, everybody has Arial. I don't see who wouldn't have that. So somebody's going to have one of these two. So now our paragraphs are going to show up in that. And they'll look a little bigger. And actually spacing wise, they look okay. We could spread them out a little bit. If you want to use, they call that line height, just like Figma. They call it line height. And I'm going to put 120% just to see what it does. Put 120% just to see if it changes it or it stays the same. And it almost tightens it a little. So I might even want to make it 130. Just make it a little bit more. And let's do that. That's okay. That has a nice little lightness to it. So we have padding above, padding top of each paragraph. So each paragraph has padding top. We adjust the line spacing so it's 130. Even though it was 120 here, we made it a little bit lighter, which I think looks better. It's easier to read. And it's a different, that's a Roboto, this is Calibri, so it looks a little different. And then we might as well put the subheading. We don't want to use a different sans serif font. If we're using a sans serif here like we used a Roboto, and here we used Roboto, we should use like a Roboto bold or use a Calibri bold. So we're going to go here and we're going to choose H2. Now typically I don't like to work from the small in. I like to work from our H1 first and work down, but we're doing this kind of backwards here. And I guess we're going by detail. So there's more paragraphs. That's why we did that first. Then I'll do H2. And remember, it's a selector, so we put the curly brace. And font family, I'll just copy this. Just use the same exact one. Font family. And I won't have to put it in bold because an H2 headlines are naturally in bold. So I will not have to put a bold. But we can put a font weight if we need to. If we needed to put font, they do have a font weight, which you can put bold, but we don't have to because H2s are already in bold. Just want to point that out. So let's see what that looks like. That's good. We may want to put that in that color. So by the way, how do you do color? It's just color. Font color is just color. And I'm actually going to copy this. Why copy that? Because we want to do a shade of that. So I'm going to copy that and paste it and put a semicolon. And then I'll click on here and just do a dark version of it. I'll kind of go down here, make kind of a brownish color. Now I think I made it a little orangier. I think orangier looks a little better. I'll hit enter and refresh. That looks nice. You can even go darker. If you think you want to go darker, click here. Move this thing around, go in the darker area, hit enter. Now it's a little darker. Maybe too dark. I think I liked it before. I'll go back and lighten it a little. Is that changing? Oh, there we go. Now it's a little lighter. And then also our headline. I don't know if we have to do anything with the spacing. There's a little more spacing. We could do some spacing, a little space after, or we could put it before the subheadline. We could put a little padding above. We could put padding just like we did here, padding top. You could even copy this, except maybe not put that much. And maybe I'll put like 6. Now you'd either put padding top on the subheadline, or you'd put padding below on the headline. Now I'm putting it padding top on that one. And there, that causes a little separation there. And then the headline looks okay. We'll probably make it a little bigger once we work with the font. And again, let's make the headline, I think 1.5 is fine. We'll make it a little bit bigger. We'll go back to our styles. Now we'll go into H1, curly brace. You only have to do it once and just hit enter. And I'm going to leave the font family what it is right now because it's like Times New Roman. So I'm just going to use that for now. And actually, let me just show something. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. Now, I don't want Calibri, Arial. I don't even want sans serif. I actually want serif. And I'm going to put Georgia here because that's a very common font that people have on their system. And actually, when I started typing that, look at how Times New Roman has quotes on it. If there's any spaces in font names, you have to put a quote around it. You have to put single or double quotes around it. So I'm going to go here and I'll start typing times, see if it comes up, and I can click on it. And it used the whole thing. Actually, don't do that. Just put a quote and put times New Roman, and then a quote, and then a comma, like that. So it should look like that. There should be quotes around it if they have spaces in there. And if you spell it wrong, it just won't show up right. It'll just use whatever's next. Now, I don't want Arial, and I want serif, any default serif at the end. So Georgia should look a little different, and it does. Georgia's a little bigger, a little wider. That actually looks nice right now. So using default fonts, Calibri and Georgia, which are really nice fonts, I like to use those for PowerPoint. That looks pretty good. That looks very similar to that. This kind of looks narrower for some reason, but we must have had more words in there. We must have less words in this right now, but that's okay. We can even go bigger with this. I think Calibri might show up smaller, and than Roboto may, but we're going to do that next. So far this is working pretty well, and I just want to point out too that when you're done, all you have to do is just highlight this and send this to me as a link, just like you do with your Figma link. This is what you send. So then I can get in and look at it, so you don't have to do anything else. So your index is how we started. Your styles is this part here, and you could start working on that. We're going to use Google Fonts to actually get fonts from the Google Fonts website and link to them, because they're not in here. You can't just put Roboto in here. I mean, you can. You can go in here and put Roboto, and I'm going to put them in a single quote, Roboto, and then a space. And usually web fonts that you're getting from somewhere else, whether they have a space or not, you'll usually put quotes in there. So that indicates that it's like a Google font. So I'll put Roboto in here. I'll put a quote, Roboto. And remember, you can type Roboto and a comma, and then you can highlight this and just put a single quote, and it'll put the quote around both ends of it. So we're going to use Roboto for the H2, and then for the H1, we can put Crimson Pro, comma, and then we'll highlight this and we'll put that with a single quote. So we're going to use Roboto and Crimson Pro. Now, if I have them on my system, if I have Roboto loaded on my system in Crimson Pro, which they actually may go in that. And that looks like it's Crimson Pro because I think I downloaded Crimson Pro and put it in there. So that's Crimson Pro, but this is not. I just like using Crimson Pro because I've used it for Gravit and Figma and things like that. So we're going to link to these. So these aren't really showing up because they're not on your system. So we're going to have to link to them through Google Fonts. And I'll show you how to do that in the next video. But right now, if you did this, you're off to a pretty good start of working with CSS and HTML and all kinds of stuff in here. So again, this is what we have in here. We have our body background color, a light blue. We wiped out the margin and padding. We wiped out all the defaults. Then for our div, we put a background color, a width, padding, margin on either side, which is auto, which centers it. And then margin top brings it down. That's what margin top brings it down. Margin auto centers it. And for paragraphs, we had space above, which is padding top. We put it in a sans serif font. We used a line height of 130 to spread it out a little bit. Our H2s are using the same font. We don't have to put it in bold because it does bold naturally if it's a heading, which it is. If it's an H in front of it, it's a heading. We put a little padding top on it to separate from the headline a little bit, the main headline. And we put a color on it. And then H1, we just specified Crimson Pro, and it's actually using it because I have it on my system, but we're actually going to link to it. And we're going to make it a little bigger. And actually, I'll go here and make it a little bigger. The last thing I'll do is I'll put font size. We haven't done this yet. I'll put font size and a colon, and I'll put 36 pixels. So that should make it a little bit bigger. Let's just see. And it does. Makes it a little bigger. You can even go higher than that because Crimson Pro looks a little smaller than the Georgia we were looking at. So you can even go a little bigger than that. But that's not a bad looking headline, not a bad looking subheadline. And we'll finish this up in part 2. There's your code. There's your CSS code. So most of the work, this is formatting, except we're writing code, but we're still formatting. And what we'll do in part 3, which shouldn't be that long, is we're just going to use 2 Google fonts and incorporate them in there so that we could use the same fonts when we design in Figma as we're using on our web page. And then everybody can use them because as long as you're linking to them, if people are connected to the web, they can use any font that's on the web. So they could use those Google fonts from the web. So we're going to be doing that in part 3. So we'll see you back here in part 3.